This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so in the last chapter, we were working with code blocks, and in the examples, they were showing us that we can use code blocks to iterate through different collections. In this chapter, we're going to execute with around. Um, so the first example is showing us how we're going to implement a logger, right? And the logger is going to send a log message that's going to say, okay, we're going to start we're going to start some operation, and then we're going to perform the operation, and then at the end of it, we're going to say, okay, we've completed the operation. So um,
Yeah.
this is an operation that we're performing before and after. So uh, we're we're using code blocks to help us do some work in the middle, and so that's why the first example on page 220 here gives us gives us an initial uh, view of how you might write this without blocks. Um, and so we're looking at this code, but it's a little long, and so it's basically saying, okay, we can do this with regular Ruby code, it's fine, but it looks a little bit messy. So
Yeah.
instead, what we're going to do is um, on page 223, they've refactored the code to write a code block with logging. So the block that we're going to create is going to pass in a variable called load. So we're looking on page 223, the first
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
with logging load, and then we pass in the code block, and we're going to load this document called resume.txt into an instance variable called @doc. And because we're using the with logging method that takes in a block, it's going to log that we're starting the operation and that we've completed the operation, and it's going to handle any errors that happen in between. I'm getting Mutin, I'm getting a little feedback from my own voice. Can you turn
Oh,
me down, please?
sorry about that. Is it okay now?
Yeah, I think that worked.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Okay. Um, so right. We can also split up on now I'm on page 224, and we can split up the operation to just do a before. So we can create this method called log before, where we state that we're gonna start the operation and then begin the operation. And then we can also create a log after method, which um, will go through the operation, and then once it's finished, it'll log that it has finished. Um, okay, so we can set up I'm on page 225 now, and it's showing us
Okay.
examples of how we can set up a class to take in some block. Um, and here on in the initialize method, we're seeing that uh, we're going to perform some sort of uh, some sort of operation. We're going to pass in an instance of self to whatever block is given, which means that when we create a new document, now I'm on sort of the bottom half of 225. So when
Yeah.
we create a new document, we can pass in a code block, and we're defining this code block with the do and end here, and we're going to just set up the content, and we're going to we're the D that we're getting here as a variable is an instance of self. So so we're calling this self.content, and we're pushing into that array, we the people, and then in order to form a more perfect union, provide for the most common events, and it puts all of that content into this document, new document
Yeah.
variable. So that's if you want. Um, I mean, this example is basically just giving us another way of initializing this document and providing us with just the self, that variable self, which will basically let us to do any sort of thing on that document.
Yeah. So one thing I would love to say, if that's
Yeah,
okay with you, Nelson, is that what we're seeing here, the very last code you referenced, is that we're trying to create a new instance, an instance of that document class. And instead of writing this entire string out on like a very long line, I think we kind of break it down into three more readable lines using the code block. I don't know if that's the case, yeah. Because to me, it looks more like we, instead of putting all these strings which are part of the content inside the brackets, we take that content out and we're like, okay, you know what? We're going to add this content one sentence at a time. I don't know
I
what you think of.
I don't think that's the real reason for this. So
Mm.
structurally, this content thing is an array, and each time we use it's the shovel operator. It's the
Oh, yeah.
uh, it's the lesser than symbol, um, two lesser than symbols.
Yeah.
That's called the
Yeah.
shovel operator. So we're putting that into the first index of the array. And then for the second line, we're putting that string or that string literal into the second container of the array. And then the third container of the array will the last line will go into the third container. If we wanted all of this to be a single string, there are ways to do that, and it's a different syntax. So you know, line multi-line strings in Ruby. Okay, so yeah, it's called a here doc. It's here here doc syntax, and basically, okay, maybe I can share my screen with you. Oh, okay. All right, can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the syntax is just a little bit different because it starts with um, th this, which is not a shovel operator because it has the tilde on there.
Mm.
But it's basically, I'm going to begin a multi-line text. I'm going to end a multi-line text, and I'm going to put three lines, each on their own line. But the whole thing at the end of the day is going to be a string object, as opposed
Uh,
to as opposed to the example, which we're putting all of that not in a string object, but into an array.
so it we are adding to the array.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It makes sense now.
Okay. So when we're creating this block, um, I'm on page 226 now. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, a key part of doing a successful execute around method is paying attention to what goes into and what comes out of the block. Um, let's start with the input side of the equation. Okay, so here we've defined a method called with logging that takes in two things. It takes in a string called description, which we're going to use for logging purposes, and
Yeah.
something else called the object. Interesting. Okay, we'll see how the object is used. Okay, so in this line here, we're going to start logging and we're going to put in the description. Great. And then we're going to yield to the block and we're going to pass in the object. Okay, how is this used? We're going to go back to this method and see that with logging, you have a description and then you have an object, which is just nil. And this is nil because we're not using it. So it's not, I mean, we're going to pass nil into this block, but we're never going to use it. So that's fine. In this next one, we pass in the at doc uh, instance variable, and we access it with this name called the object. And
Yeah.
so we can call the object.save, which is basically the same thing as saying at doc.save. So we're saving
Yeah.
this doc. So you can pass in, just like functions, you can pass in arguments to code blocks. And it's this syntax yield and then the object. The parentheses, as always, are optional. Okay. And so here on page 227, they give us an example of when this could be used. Uh, and it's basically get yielding a database connection to the block. So whatever you want to do with that database connection, you can get it because we establish a new connection beforehand. We pass the connection to the block, and then we ensure that we close the connection afterwards. And this applies to database collections. It applies to opening and closing files for reading and writing, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so the other consideration is what the blocks return, and it's the same rules as functions, where the last statement it gets returned.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if we really need to go into the example, but because it's pretty simple. It's the last statement gets returned, and you can
Yeah.
assign
Yeah.
it
It's
to,
fine.
yeah, you
Mm.
can assign it to a variable.
Yeah, it's understandable. It's very fine.
Uh, okay, staying out of trouble. I don't remember what this section was about. Staying out of trouble.
Well, for this specific chapter or for the previous one?
No, I'm on page. I remember what this was about now. Okay, so there are a few things that you need to be aware of when you're working with blocks, and that's that uh, the oh wait, no, I thought this was about ending the iterations um, with break statements, but it's not. That was the
Yeah, that
previous
was for the
chapter.
previous one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Hold on. I'm gonna have to read it
No,
unless you.
I can go through it if you're okay with that.
Yeah, I don't remember what they were trying to say in this section.
Yeah. So basically, remember that throughout this chapter, we've focused on logging as an application for the execute around technique, and as part of the staying out of trouble section, the author is telling us that we should never forget about exception handling, whereby we define what the method should do, what should be done if the method is run successfully, and what should be done if the method fails at any one point. And to quote him, he says the whole idea of execute around or the execute around technique is that the caller is guaranteed that this will happen before the code block fires, and that will happen after. Don't let some stray exception sully the reputation of your method for absolutely positively getting the job done. And then after that, telling us that we need to ensure that there's like exceptional handling so that we know how to work on any failures that might result when the program is running. He tells us he talks about naming our execute around methods, I think. And the code at the bottom of page 228, we have a code block, execute between logging statements, and then we pass in update as the string, and then we have the do and syntax with stuff defined inside. So he compares this code or this execute around block to the one on chapter 229. And he says that the code on chapter 229 at the very first part of the page is more readable compared to the one on chapter 228. And to quote him, this is now I'm back to page 228. He says, with execute around, you also need to consider the human factor. A critical difference between just using execute around and really applying it elegantly lies in the name you pick for your method. A good name should make sense in the context of the application code, which in this case is the code that is calling the method. Don't think don't think of it so much as naming a new method as naming a new feature that you're adding to the Ruby language. I think the issue with the code on page 2 to 8, I think it's because the name is a bit long. I'm not sure about that, but I think it's because the name is longer compared to the one on page 229. And I think that's what this section was all about: exception handling and what you should consider when naming your execute around methods, and that is readability.
Yeah.
And then I think we proceed to the in the wild method. Either Nelson.
Yeah, so this is just an example of what we were talking about,
Eh,
where you're passing in the code block and um, you're it's this open method takes in a block and does some operation to open the file and then close the file, and you can do whatever you want in between. Um, okay, so uh, gem spec is also a place where you can define um, new options for your gems. So this S stands for spec. Spec.name is rake. Spec.version. You can set up all the different parts of a spec. Um, and it's
yeah, I've seen the.
yeah, this is really interesting because a lot of these, are uh, it would be very, very clumsy to to do this as parameters to the specification.new because
Yeah.
specification.new could get really, really long, right?
Yeah.
Specification.new, name, version, summary, description, and then it could just go on and on. But there's so many things that you can set, so many options that you can set that this do block just makes it a whole lot easier to say, okay, just pass in the whole block. I'm going to set all these things in one go. And here we see an example of a multi-line string being defined,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, in the wild. Okay, so a migration class. Um, it's, this is also going to be a place where we see code blocks being used in the wild. And say with time, it's basically it's going to do the same thing as the same message, except I expect that it's going to add the amount of time it took.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's measuring the time it took to run the code block, basically. Okay, so that's more or less the end of the chapter. We've talked about code blocks a lot. They're
Yeah.
really handy way of organizing the code, and we saw it in places where, if you know what need, if you know beforehand what you need to do before and after, but you don't know what needs to happen in between, code blocks are a good place to put a stub and say, okay, someone can, we're going to put a placeholder here for your code, and you can do whatever you want in your code, but we absolutely need to do this beforehand or afterwards. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that's what code blocks are.
Yeah. So I think that's it. So next week, 19 and 20. I think we can end it right now.
Okay.